And then they came for the socialists. I was not a socialist, trade unionist, not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews. I was not a Jew, so I did nothing. And then they came for me. There was no one left to do anything for me. And that's the situation we're sliding into. So please start looking at these issues and start fighting back. We all have to take that stand. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for that. I'm really moved. Any questions? Any questions? Next one.
Hello. A few weeks ago, I read something about. No, I will start from the beginning. Do you know the RIP Act of the UK? It's RIP Act, the
yes,
Regulation of Investigatory Powers. Is that right?
The Grim
okay.
Reaper.
Okay. Like 2 months ago, I read there was a woman that was. She was suggested by the prosecution to give out personal information from her encrypted hard disk on part 2 or 3 of the RIP Act, but this was no official suggestion. So, and this woman was an animal activist, but the story just disappeared after it happened, and I would like to know if you know more about this, or anybody does.
I don't remember that particular case, I'm afraid, but one sort of development we're seeing a lot in the UK is that there are various sort of spy-type cases hitting the headlines, you know, big terror plot, ricin, shoe bombers on planes, whatever. Animal activists as well, by the sounds of it. And you get the big screaming headlines, but then they just fade and they're never reported again. You never really see. So It's almost like the artificial threat is being ramped up to make us all very afraid and to agree to all these draconian measures. REPO was actually put in place, it replaced an old act from the 1980s, the Interception of Communications Act, which governs how and why the spies can intercept our communications. In the old days, all they could do was apply for a warrant from the Home Office, the Home Secretary or the Foreign Office, to intercept your call, and they had to do it, otherwise it was an illegal telephone intercept, and they should have been prosecuted. But, you know, they kept getting away with it. There were many, many illegal telephone intercepts that we experienced on the inside. As I mentioned, there was one into the Guardian journalist for a start. In terms of REPO, that is much more all-embracing. I mean, they can keep our subscriber lists now for months. You know, they don't need a warrant to look at that even. They can go prying very, very easily. I mean, I'm not technical at all, as some of you will be aware. So I'm not sure exactly how it is done or how we can perhaps counter it, but I'd be willing to hear. I'd be very keen to hear if there are ways around it. So, any other questions?
Yeah, after being on the run, why did you go back to the UK? What is the motivation behind this?
As I said, we were sort of on the run and in hiding for a year. Then they failed to extradite him. Then we had 2 more years in Paris, where we did do a lot of campaigning. At that point, David was in France. He couldn't even leave France, because if he did, he risked further arrest. But I used to sort of ping-pong backwards and forwards between Paris and London, trying to build up media awareness and support. And we really felt we'd taken it as far as we could. Also, I became very ill that year. I came down with the worst form of meningitis, which rather puzzled the doctors in France, because that form of meningitis didn't exist in Paris at that time. They didn't know where I got it from. So you can make of that what you will. And almost died. And David took the decision then that the strain was just too much and we should go back, face the music. He, as I said, expected to be put on trial rapidly. He was going to fight it by saying that his freedom of expression meant that, you know, he could disclose criminality on the part of the spies. But unfortunately, they sort of stitched him up through this whole process of pre-trial hearings, and he ended up being convicted, which is a real shame, because in terms of precedent for other whistleblowers, we're now seeing a whole slew of intelligence whistleblowers being prosecuted in the same way. So, but yeah, we went back, 1, because we'd taken it as far as we could, I think, from abroad. 2, I think you realise that you can't spend your entire life in exile. It does get to you mentally, being trapped in one country. And 3, he wanted to make a strong political statement, you know.
Good morning, and thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
What is the mindset of the management of these security services? When I hear the mindset of our community, it is, we look into the future and we say, I don't want my children to live in a world like that. But why does the management of the security services head us for a police state, and do they think this is a desirable thing?
Yeah, basically. I think, I mean, any journalist knows everyone always thinks they personally are good people. I'm sure they think they are genuinely doing something to protect the country. But the problem is MI5 and MI6 operate in a uniquely secret environment, even compared to other spy agencies, because there is no accountability. They have the Protection of the Official Secrets Act. So you end up with a sort of self-perpetuating oligarchy, where the people who question are told not to rock the boat, so they either learn to shut up and put up, and then they will progress up the management chain, or they leave. So you end up with usually the dullards who can't find other jobs, progressing slowly up the chain and becoming the head or whatever, or senior management. And as I said, it's sort of self-perpetuating because they verify each other. They don't learn from their mistakes. They will bury their mistakes. They will lie to government ministers about their mistakes. So there's no constructive criticism either. They can get away with it. So I think it's those two things really lead to that mindset. It's interesting as well because when you go into that job, you do really feel that you can do something good, you know, to help protect your country and, you know, save people's lives. So to go from that sort of idealism to this sort of fossilized, power-crazed position is quite a journey, I think. I mean, one of the things that really hit me, I think last year when I heard about it, was the idea that intelligence officers from 6 and 5 are involved in the Extraordinary Rendition Programme and the interrogation of suspects at these secret prisons. Not necessarily doing the torture, but present during the interrogations and feeding back questions to the people being tortured. And I suppose they're people who are with my generation. I mean, if I'd stayed, I'd now be sort of junior senior management or whatever. And they'd be the people doing this. And they might be people who are my friends that I went out drinking with or, you know, had around for dinner. So how do they go from those people to people who can collude in torture? I don't know. But I think they probably think they're doing it for the good of society, you know. It's almost a nanny-ish sort of mindset. We'll protect you, you don't need to worry about it. Give us more power. Yeah. Any other questions? Oh, you've had one. Anyone else?
Thank you very much for sharing that experience with us. I'm just wondering, listening to what happened to you, it doesn't seem to be quite a success story in my opinion. Having revisited and experienced what you did, what would you do differently if you had to go through that same experience again, number one? Number two, what is the learning experience that the Secret Services actually had? Did you discover anything and revisiting what happened to you? Do you think if all that happened again, would it happen differently, or would it be just the same all over again?
I think, well, to answer the second one first, I think it will happen all over again. There will inevitably be another whistleblower at some point, soon probably. There seems to be about one a decade. The services don't learn from their mistakes. They will mythologize the whistleblower within the service, demonize them, turn them into, you know, someone who had personal problems or a grudge or was unstable or whatever. They won't actually address what the critique of the message is. They will shoot the messenger. So I think it's inevitable that that will happen again. In terms of how we would have done things differently, yes, definitely, there are things we would have done differently. One would have been not to trust bloody journalists, on the whole. They just asset strip you of information. There are some good journalists. I mean, I can think of 3 in the UK that have integrity, but... but also, of course, this was in '97, and we should have used the internet a lot more, and we should have just put all the information out there, and then they could have done their worst. But, you know, it would have had much more impact, and I think we should have done that. Unfortunately, we were pretty Luddite, well, I still am, technologically, because MI5 is appalling with its IT as well. When we first joined in 91, nobody had computers to work on. Everyone had to handwrite everything and get a secretary to type it up. And even in '93, they were still using a database for the IRA terrorists called Durbar, that was its code name. And this was a sort of 1970s beige sort of computer, all in one with the sort of terminal and keyboard. That was in 1993. That was their shit-hot IT at the time. They then spent about 10 years trying to develop their own in-house system, which they codenamed Grant, which just they couldn't get it to work. So in desperation, they bought Microsoft off the shelf. I know. So the whole of their IT is run on Microsoft 95, it's codename Corona. So you really couldn't make it up. So for that reason, neither of us was particularly internet savvy at that point. But yes, Dave got up to speed very quickly and started building his own website, which strangely was hacked just before it went live as well. It was around the time when he was arrested in '98. He'd got the domain name and was just waiting for the password to come through, and then he got nabbed on the streets of Paris. And it turned out, when we questioned this, that the password had been intercepted from the internet service provider en route to Dave. Now, I don't know how technically feasible that is, but anyway, someone had picked up the password, gone into the site, and sort of written all sorts of rude things about him on the front page, which again struck me as slightly odd, because people don't usually do that to anti-establishment websites. When we took it up with the Californian ISP, they said they thought it was a professional job, that their password had been seized and the thing had been hacked. It was also interesting as well, just one little coda to that, is that the UK government had taken out this injunction against Shayla. And they said to the Californian internet service provider, "You are aware that we have an injunction against this man, you can't host his site." The Californian company just turned around and said, "Piss off, what about 1776? Anyway, yes, so that would have been the one big thing we would have done differently, is use of the internet. Just put all the information out there and they could have done their worst. It would have been there, would have hit the headlines. Hopefully there would have been an inquiry into the crimes of the spies. How are we doing for time?
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, one more question perhaps. It's now past. I don't want to...
Over here. Hello? I've got it.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. I'm part of those campaigns like the Abolition of Parliament Act, and I've been following these for a while. But I want to ask you more about the journalists, because I'm always baffled at how easy they seem to be manipulated. When you think of them, that they're professionals, they ought to have seen all this before, and they ought to have some kind of embarrassment, not so much integrity, but just embarrassment at being played for the fool year after year. Have you got any comments as to why they do this, why they allow themselves to be manipulated, and do they enjoy being manipulated in this way? Thank you.
I think some do, yeah. No, there's a couple of basic reasons, I think. One is, obviously, most journalists go into journalism because they want to be the new Woodward and Bernstein. They want to do their bit, but quickly realise they're up against editors and even the proprietors of newspapers with a line to push, so they've got to churn out the copy and get their name in print and all that sort of thing. And if you're reporting on things like intelligence or defence or home affairs or even politics, you are given briefings. And if you don't print those briefings, or if you question those briefings, then you're not given future ones, so you don't get the information to do your job. And apparently, because I'm also a slight journalist myself on the side sometimes and a member of the union, they've been doing some calculations on this. Apparently journalists now have to produce 4 times as much copy in half the time as they did 20 years ago. So they're just constantly on this treadmill. It's also very seductive. If you're a journalist and you're invited into the Charms secret circle, then it's very sexy and it can give you status amongst your peers. There was an article by a chap called David Rose, quite a well-respected journalist, recently in the New Statesman in the UK, and he said that he had been approached by MI6 about a decade ago and was drip-fed stories, and it got to a point where he was compromised by that as a journalist, but if he stopped, it would cause him problems, he wouldn't get the copy, he'd lose his job, and of course they got to pay the rent and all that sort of thing. So I think it's a sort of a carrot and a stick situation. One, you've got to do what they tell you, otherwise you can't do your job, but 2, you're flattered as well that you are inducted into the Charm circle. There are, as I said, there are some journalists who will take the risk and stick their neck out, and I really salute them. But on the whole, I don't know, a shower. Anyway, I think we're probably out of time, but thank you very much all for coming, and I've really enjoyed being here, so thank you.